So what are your pet peeves in this practice area? What drives you absolutely like nuts sometimes?
Wage and hour stuff, really. I think that drives me crazy. Because I feel like there are so many ways for people to run astray a bit, like good employers to kind of just make small mistakes and it just piles up, like, putting the wrong address on your wage statements and not really thinking about it. And then suddenly you're hit with the massive lawsuit. So I think there's things like that that are incredibly frustrating. I also think that there are some mill firms that sort of take anyone who walks in the door for plaintiff cases. And I think that does a disservice because sometimes people with very strong cases end up going to a firm that just sort of sees them as a number and, isn't really investigating all their issues in their case. And then also some other people are just sort of driven to sue, even if they don't really have a strong case. So I think that kind of just backs up the courts and makes it a lot harder for employers to really focus on righting actual wrongs that their employees have experienced.
And so, segueing into, like, you've been in this for 14 years. What are like some mistakes that you see some other inexperienced or a new employment lawyer or any attorney make that you caution, if you mentor anyone, you mention it to them not to do?
On the plaintiff side of things, I think there's sort of oftentimes not sort of looking at the full issue or just getting very focused on one issue. Like you think that there's a case of sexual harassment and that's all you focus on. And you don't really look farther and saying like, oh, maybe there's also an age discrimination issue. Maybe there's wage and hour. Like, so getting very pigeonholed into looking at only one thing or, so I think that's an area. I also really hate when people just copy and paste complaints and they don't make any sense. So it's like, oh, the employer's name is wrong. The sex of the person is wrong. I don't even know what's going on at this point. When did they work here? When did they not? So I think you do have to have that sort of attention to detail. And then I think in both sides, whether you're a plaintiff or a defendant, you really have to do your due diligence because, no one's going to tell you the completely accurate story on their own. So you really have to dig deep and look for documents, look for support on either side, to actually find out what happened. Because I think that's a big issue. People just sort of blindly believe, like someone will be like, no, I followed the laws. And then it's like, okay, let's look at your documents and see if we have any support for this, or let's talk to other employees, or let's talk to other managers and find out what happened. So I think doing that due diligence is really important.
One of the things that drives me nuts, inevitably we'll always get a demand letter for hundreds of thousands of dollars and they end up settling. And part of it's like, well, my standard is to mention a demur because they don't, like you said, it's a copy and paste complaint. And I'm like, what are you talking about? This person is X, Y, and Z. And you can tell they get taken aback because unfortunately, some cases are like ADA cases, like the drive-by lawsuits where employers or business owners will settle. And some of these firms have just gotten so used to settling. And when there's even any kind of pushback, you can tell that, the opposing counsel, my matter was a little taken aback. He's like, well, and you can tell he was like fumbling because I'm like, this doesn't even make sense. I'm not going to file an answer and I'm going to file. And they're like, oh, and then you can tell that it's stumbling. And it's unfortunate because you can tell it's become like they're just trying to, like you said, they're not investigating. They're just taking them at the word or copying and pasting and just they used to just settling for pennies on the dollar because most employers or businesses unfortunately also don't want to spend the money. It's a hard role to be in, right? Because
it's really challenging. And I think it's really hard for defendants too, because even if you think the case is without merit, it's very expensive to defend cases. And so you kind of have to make a business analysis. And even if the case is only worth a very small amount of money, you've got to remember as a defendant, if you take it all the way to trial and you sort of win, but they get like $200, they get $500, they get all their attorney's fees. So, that's always that risk that you really have to kind of balance what makes sense. And I do think in a lot of those cases, the employee is sort of lost in it because they're not getting justice or they're getting sort of used to run up fees sometimes, which is not ideal.